Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Bear Experiment podcast. I'm your host, Monica Clavijo. Today's special guest is Dr. Dallas Braggs. Um, this was such an amazing podcast. Dallas is a former crystal meth addict with a PhD. He shares his story on his marriage with two children and how he was always a closeted homosexual. And that was part of all the internal pain that he was always holding on to. He found a euphoria in crystal meth and his intercourse with other men, and it made him feel wanted and accepted. He fell into a very deep addiction. He started smoking it, then he started injecting it. He lost everything: his job, his family, his home, his dignity. He went to prison several times. And part of his journey of rehabilitation right now, where he's been sober for 6 years, is helping other gay men that are struggling with this horrible addiction. He has an active podcast on YouTube right now. He's all over social media and he offers one on one counseling to anybody that's at the stage where he was at for free with all of the information, all the valuable information that he's learned from his rehab and his journey. So please join me on this very special interview with Dr. Dallas Braggs. Thank you so much for watching. And please remember to subscribe. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Bear Experiment podcast. Today's special guest with me is my friend, Dallas Braggs, Dr. Dallas Braggs. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Monica, for having me.
Thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate
Mhm.
you doing this for me. I think that it's a wonderful thing what you're doing, how you're helping everyone. So, you've struggled a lot with the addiction to crystal meth, right? Street name Tina. I've learned a lot
Yeah.
researching about this with you, for this interview with you.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so, why don't you walk us through the first time that you ever tried crystal meth? And my curiosity with that is because people say that, everybody thinks like once I try it, I could do it, I could party, I'm not gonna get addicted, I'm stronger than
hmm
that, I'm a professional. You have a
hmm
PhD, right? Like you have
Right.
your shit together.
Right.
Um, so my question to you is, did you feel an instant like euphoric feeling where you were like, shit, I gotta have this again the first time that you tried?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. So yeah, Tina is the street name that gays use for crystal meth. And
Oh,
then
okay.
straight straight people, heterosexual people will call it ice or some other things. It's different because it's two different worlds.
Okay.
And I've traveled with both. But my first time using, so I on the outside, I probably looked like I had my shit together. A PhD. I had a job as an executive with a law school. I was teaching as an adjunct professor and making six figures. However, I didn't have my emotional shit together because there were years, at that time I was 39, I guess. It was 39 years of not taking care of myself in terms of I I hated who I was. I had hid who I was until I came out at 36.
Okay.
And then when I came out, I still had to hide who I was because the gay community that I exposed myself to were just as judgmental as they made me feel as insecure as I did before. There were more comments about my effeminate nature, and there were more, there's barriers to me being who I wanted to be, who was my true self in the gay community than there was when I was pretending to be straight.
That's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And so I kind of spiraled, because I was like, where do I belong?
Right, right.
I've spent all my life thinking this was the answer. If I came out, I would be happy. If I came out, I would find my tribe. I would be accepted and I would be complete. And so, but the problem is you're never going to find acceptance and completeness outside of yourself. Of course, I didn't know that. So anyway, I at the time, I was on Grindr, which is, the a gay hookup app, and there was a new square in the neighborhood, a new guy, and he asked me if I partied. Well, this was Sunday morning,
Okay.
almost noon. I was out back reading a book, and I was like, "Well, I think he's talking about day drinking. I do that, you know." So I pictured like, we're going to sit out by the pool or whatever, and we're going to drink, and of course we're going to have sex because that was what was the point. But when I got there, that wasn't the scene. It was, well, first of all, this house, was overgrown. It looked like a shack almost, and but this really attractive, hot guy come to the door. And I was like, well, I'm here. So I'm just gonna go. And so, but inside was dark, windows covered, porn on about three different TVs, a sling hanging from the ceiling,
Oh my
clo
God.
you know, and clothes it was just disheveled. And I was like, I don't know what's happening here, but I would so he said, so he hands me a pipe. And I was like, I'm holding it like this. I'm surprised I didn't drop it. I was like, I don't know what this is. And he's like, you said you partied. And I was like, you know, I do. But so anyway, we had this back and forth. But the thing is that once I got there and experienced him, he looked at me, touched me, and acted and talked to me the way that I had been dying to be treated all of my life. I didn't know it was because he was on a sex drug. All I knew was I had been waiting to feel this wanted all my life. And so I was in it. And so I just said, okay, just give me what you're doing. He showed me what to do. And yes, so instantly, all my shame, all my guilt, all my insecurities, my inhibitions, all were just
Went
gone
away.
in an instant. And for the first time in my 39 years, I wasn't self-conscious about how I acted, what I looked like. I threw my clothes off, because I even at that point, I was still insecure getting naked around people in the daylight. I was just like set free. And it was like, this is what I've been waiting for.
Right. Right. You finally felt yourself. But
Yeah,
it
yeah.
really wasn't you.
But it really wasn't me.
Right. Right.
To me, it was. And so I was like, I don't know what this is, but I want so and then we ended up having sex for like a day, probably 24 hours straight. Because that's what you do.
Because when you're on that drug, when you're on crystal meth, you're
Mhm.
awake for days at a time,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can't think. So here's another difference between the homosexual and heterosexual people using it. Now, heterosexual people do use it for sex, just not to the extreme that we do as a gay culture. We have to have parties and orgies and more men and hours and hours of porn. And and so I experienced this for 24 straight hours with this guy. And so when you're on this drug and your dopamine is so high and you're so alert and you're experiencing everything in such an intense way, you just get so connected to this person. And not only that, it was when it was over, I was like, I have finally found this. This is my tribe. This is my crowd. I had heard of crystal meth because I grew up in West Virginia, but the people I knew who had been on crystal meth were nothing like him. And
Right.
when I
Because
started to find,
this guy looked normal. This guy was attractive. This guy
yeah,
had, yeah.
all the guys, most all the guys that I was meeting in Charlotte were hot, just built, attractive. You would never know that they were on crystal meth. There was actually a whole regimen that I was taught to keep hydrated and to do certain tactics and have biotin to spray in your mouth and stuff like that, just to keep yourself
To keep
healthy
going.
looking
Yeah.
doing it. So you could just keep having more and more sex. But so the first time I was hooked, and I immediately just jumped into the crowd. And I knew from him, I knew what the little language was. It has its own language on the apps. You use a capital T for Tina.
Okay.
So you say party with a capital T, and that, and or you use a now these days that was back in the day, but now these days there are emojis with the part, the little party emoji with
Yeah.
the
Uh-huh.
party hat or whatever. There's different things you use, and that's the secret language, so you don't have to actually spell out the fact that you're smoking crystal meth. And so I just fell right in, and from that day until 3.5 years later, in that span of time, I lost it all. I lost my kids. I was evicted. My car was repossessed. I was fired. I was arrested 4 times. I
Jesus.
mean, I just it just snowballed because the thing is that it also crystal meth knows it's an intelligent drug. It knows how to go into your brain, identify your insecurities, and just accelerate them to the fact that when you're on it, you have to have it to feel normal. Because it's so weird. If someone is prone to, let's say, for me, I lacked self-acceptance, so I would just cling on to these men. And while being high, I felt that acceptance. I felt that euphoria, that heaven. And then of course getting off of it was pure hell because everything crashed, your emotions crashed and all that. So I had to have more. And so then I got into injecting it. And that's when it really turned ugly for me. It started affecting my brain. I stopped paying my bills. I stopped working. I was floating through life. And since I wasn't working, got addicted to shoplifting. And I got made two friends and we started getting into fraud. We started printing our own checks. We were printing our own money and people were accepting it somehow. $10 bills for some reason. We were stealing. We were just doing everything. We would start the day at zero and try to get as much money as we could by the end of the day to buy enough drugs. And if we had left over, we would eat.
All rationality just goes out the window.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
often, how often were you using then? Would you say like in a period, what so you're on for, I mean, how does that work?
I was I was injecting 3 times a day.
3 times a day. And
Three
that,
times a day.
okay. And how
Mhm.
often then? Every single day, three
Every
times a day?
day, every
Jeez.
day. So eventually I started sleeping and eating on it. My body got so used to it. And then it was less about sex and more about just a chemical dependency.
Yeah, the addiction that you had to it.
Yeah, it was just, and then I was just totally clueless. I mean, the day I got evicted, the landlord put his arm around me. He was like, you have to go. The sheriff is here. Like I was just I didn't believe that it would actually happen, even though I had been to court. You know,
Right.
I in my mind I thought I was going to write a bad check and to get enough money to pay this rent on time.
The delusion had already played out in your head on how you
Yeah,
were
yeah,
going to be
yeah,
okay from that. So then
yeah,
it was for a period of 3 years that you were using basically on a full-time basis.
yeah, yeah, yeah. 3 years, 3 years of that. I there was a couple of times when I got sober. I contracted the first time I used the needle is when I contracted HIV. And the gentleman actually there's a there's some fetishes in the meth community that are a little dark, and one of them is pausing, and that's when you get off on giving HIV to men.
No way.
Yeah, and then there's bug chasers, so there are men that aren't affected with it that like the risk of having sex with men who have it.
That's insane. That's
Yeah,
absolutely insane.
yeah, it is.
And which one were
Uh,
you?
I wasn't either. He paused me.
Okay.
And so he knew he had it. So I either got it from him or the needle that he used, whichever one or both. But he told me at the end of our sessions, he was like, "Congratulations, you have AIDS." And
Okay, so
so,
so let me
yeah,
ask you this. So you're addicted to this horrible drug, crystal meth, where you know that you have an issue. You know that it's not the right thing to to do. You know that it's tearing you apart, right? So that alone is
mhm,
messing with your head a lot.
mhm, mhm.
And now you get the news that you've contracted HIV. what does
Mhm.
that do to you? How do you feel?
Yeah. Yeah.
What are the thoughts that are going to your head? Because even though there's a pill that you can take now, there's still a stigma and a fear associated with HIV. I mean,
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
what did you think at that moment? Was it just like a bomb that hit you, like something else, or
Mhm.
you're like, okay, I'm done?
Yeah. So when guys, so HIV is rampant in the meth community because there's never any protection used.
Hmm.
And yes, there is PrEP now, but back, this was for me 2016, and honestly, PrEP was talked about, but it wasn't really that prevalent
Like
as
it
it
is
is now.
today, right?
Yeah. Um, but when I first found out, men usually have two reactions when they find out they have HIV and they're a crystal meth addict. They either go on a rampage of death, the death wish, where they're like, I have it anyway,
Right.
or they stop. And so I actually decided that that made me pause and get sober for about 3 or 4 months. I was devastated, but more so for my kids. And the thing is that I went to the clinic, the health clinic, and the lady that sits there and just, all she does all day is give out results, right? And she told me my results and she says, it's not a death sentence anymore. And then I proceeded to hear that like 25,000 times from everybody, it's not a death sentence anymore. And for some reason, I was like, stop fucking saying, I'm sorry, stop saying that to me. It didn't matter to me that it wasn't a death
Right.
sentence. To me, it meant my life was never going to be the same.
Right.
I had to now come to tell my kids, and then I started to really think about my mortality for the first time. For something I was really thinking, wow, you're like, I'm going to die from this. Something's going to kill me if I continue this
On this
lifestyle.
path that you're on.
Yeah, yeah. And so I went right away to the doctor, and honestly, he said if I would have come just days sooner, it could have been reversed. I came
Really?
so quickly because the guy said I had it. So I went, but I couldn't get the appointment fast enough.
What do you mean get it reversed?
So if you go, so when you contract it, if you get to the medication fast enough in time, it can actually reverse the effects of it early on.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I did get sober for a little while, and I went back to my sober friends that I had before my meth addiction, and I pleaded for their forgiveness, and they were supportive of me, but it wasn't very long until I went right back into it.
So, how long have you been sober today? How long has it been?
August 4th will be 6 years.
Oh,
Mhm.
congratulations,
Thank you.
Dallas. That's awesome. That's great news. I'm so happy to hear that.
Thank you.
Um, Let me just backtrack a little bit
Hmm.
because there's a curiosity that I have based on all of the information that you're putting out on your social media, where
Hmm.
it's very prevalent sexually mainly among the gay community. Why is that?
Hmm.
Explain why is it that, is it just because you orgasm at a different level when you're on it, or it's the addiction that you're just like, okay, if I take the hit, I'm just like, explain that part to me because
Hmm. Yeah. So there's a lot of factors here. And some men will say that they are addicted to the sex because it is sex on a new level. It's a sex on a level you've never had before.
right.
And it lasts forever. But the thing is that so many gay men have internalized homophobia about having sex with men, period.
Right.
There's something in their head that says you're not supposed to be doing this.
It's that programming, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of religious trauma, or their parents told them they kicked them out or whatever. There's a lot of that comes into play. And for once in their life, they get to not think about that because meth takes it all away.
Right.
And they get to explore in this new way where they become invincible, and they can be with hundreds of men in a week's time, and it just seems so like liberating. The other part of it is the gay community has fought for this right for sexual freedom, And it's almost become this expectation that if you are, if you're gay, that you're promiscuous. And a lot of men are falling into that belief and that programming. And what's getting me angry is that the leaders of the gay community aren't speaking up against what's happening with crystal meth because of this threat to take away our sexual freedoms.
Yeah.
And that is very frustrating for me because a lot of men are just falling into this pattern and like you're saying, this programming of mainstream gay expectations. We have to, we watch porn and we act out the porn and we have to go to Pride and have sex with many, many people. And you're not gay unless you're doing this or you dress, provocatively and all this kind of stuff. And it's not true. We're losing the sense of what we're fighting for in the first place. So that's another part of it. Um, the reasons are always different, but it always comes down to I'm numbing some pain, and this is the best cure for numbing that pain. Plus, I get this high experience, this dopamine high. It's crystal meth creates a higher level of dopamine than any other experience. Like if you see a chart, sex is the highest dopamine level we can experience. It's like this. Sex on meth is like this.
Really?
It's just the highest level of euphoria that we could possibly get because the thing is that it progresses too sometimes. Like you get drunk, you have sex on alcohol, you have sex on cocaine, you have sex on this or that, or Molly, but then you have sex on crystal meth, and nothing can ever
Compares.
come close.
Right.
So you just you get you're imprinted. The experience is imprinted on your brain, and then your body wants that more and more. It's like this natural cycle of I need to feel that again. You felt this made you feel better, and for a moment you weren't in fight or flight. You weren't stressed. You weren't thinking about your insecurities. So I want you to go back there to help you. There's this natural inclination of your nervous system and your ego to take you back to this experience because it thinks it's helping you, it's protecting you from
Right.
feeling all that pain that you're living with.
Right. And
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
like you said, that's the case with any other type of drug as well. It's just crystal meth just is at a different level. So did the pandemic, because I know that the pandemic had a huge increase in alcoholism where people were just stuck
Mhm.
in the homes and they were
Mhm.
drinking a lot and there was nothing else to do. Did the pandemic play an effect into an increase in the amount of methamphetamines that people were consuming within the gay community, which is what you're most connected to?
Yes, it did. I mean, and I've talked to some men who actually got sober during the pandemic because they were forced to separate, the ones that obeyed the rules,
Right,
but on for the most part, yes, because you had all this unemployment coming in, all this money, extra money coming in, and you had all this extra time,
right,
and there was this panic of yeah, again some other mortality, some other this feeling of I feel so out of control, but when I'm high on meth is the only time I can feel any type of control of my life or myself.
right.
It was like any kind of normalcy was crystal meth and pornography because everything outside was crazy.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody was just on another level. You talk a lot about the transmutation of energy
Mhm.
that you work with. From what I
Mhm.
see, you're a very spiritual man, and I'm sure that
Yeah.
that's what's
Yeah.
kind of gotten you to the level of sobriety
Uh-huh.
now, for 6 years. I don't think there's any other way that you can do that unless you get to that spiritual level. But you
Yeah.
talk about the transmutation of energy. You're feeling
Hmm.
horny, and
Hmm.
it's bringing up all those memories and feelings. And let me go get
Hmm.
some drugs. Let me go get some crystal
Hmm.
meth, and you transmute that to another part of your body.
Hmm.
You talk a lot about how you journal. And that's helped you. You journal on a
Yeah.
daily basis. You do a lot of meditation. Walk us through how you do that. So,
Hmm. Yeah. So the journaling helped me. So prior to me coming out, I was suicidal. I got suicidal at some point, and I checked myself into a mental facility. And this was the first time I came out to anybody. I came out to my wife at the time. At that point, I really started to journal. And through journaling, I was able to go back and predict when my depression was going to hit because I could pinpoint common
Oh.
phrases, common feelings. And because wait a minute, when I'm talking like that last time, I was going into a depression. So
A
I'm gonna
depression.
let's control this.
Mm-hmm.
So I did the same thing with journaling in my addiction, is I started to just first of all, write everything down, but then the reviewing and the tracking and the going back and identifying patterns and cycles. And then what comes up from the writing too is your beliefs. The beliefs that got me into this in the first place, that I'm not good enough. People don't like me. I
Your
can't be myself.
insecurities.
Right. All of these beliefs that I had picked up all of my life were staring at me through the patterns that I was writing in. And so I identified, and then I started to identify time frames. Every 3 months was my relapse cycle. And about in the middle, I would talk myself into doing something like downloading Grinder again. And I could look back and see, wait a minute, I'm using the same words to myself to validate downloading this app, but I couldn't remember.
Right.
Even though
Right.
it was 3 months ago, I couldn't remember. It was just an unconscious, unawake pattern. And so, but journaling helps you take control of all of that and say, okay, I'm going to put something into place now. I see I'm using the same words to validate downloading Grinder. So guess what? I'm not going to download it. So it's a pattern interrupt that I wouldn't have done without journaling.
And how often then do you go back reading everything that you're writing?
Mm-hmm.
Because I would imagine, because I've done that with, feelings where I've been where maybe I feel depressed as well.
Mm-hmm.
And right, you always read about that, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
start journaling. It helps you. You see the patterns that you have.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to go back and remember all the shit that I was feeling when I'm feeling good, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so how often do you go back then?
Mhm. So I keep a running tally in my journal of every 100 days, because 100 days is about my cycle. And what I was noticing is that even though I was sober from crystal meth, I was still relapsing some in one way or the other. I would have sex with some, I would have sex with a lot of people in 1 week, or I would, do something or lash out at somebody, something that would signify, okay, I see that I'm at the climax, or I'm at the end of this 100 days and I'm acting out. So for me, I count down 100 days every day on my journal. Like today's for me is like day 31 or something. I go back and I recap. But sometimes I don't have to now because I see I'm at day 31 and I pretty much know kind of where I am usually at. And if I am not sliding down that slope by now, I'm going to be pretty good for the next month.
Do you still
I,
get feelings where you want to use till this
I
day,
do.
where you
I
have to
do.
fight it?
I do. If you've used intravenously, it is extremely hard. Only 2% of those that
I was
you
reading
gay
about
men,
that.
yeah, yeah, actually fully recover for a long period
So
of
it's
time.
is it a different high,
Hmm.
smoking it as
Yeah,
opposed
yeah,
to shooting up? Okay,
yeah. It's a complete different experience, and it also imprints very heavily on the brain.
sure.
So I even today, so it's that twilight time. It's that time before you lie down, before you're asleep. It's that time, but when you're drowsy, I
Right.
think that when in that time, everything you get off guard, and I think your reasoning brain starts to let loose. And what comes in for me are the using visions of a needle going in my arm.
The feeling of getting high because it made you feel so
Yeah.
good.
The needle go the blood going into plunger, and then my body reacts as if I just used the whole gamut. Heart race. I get an erection. I
Just
get
from
sweaty.
just from thinking
Just
about it.
yeah. Yeah. Still after 6 years.
That's amazing. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Our thoughts are so powerful, right? And
Yeah.
for everything, it's all in our minds. If we can control that, we can control
Mm-hmm.
anything.
That's right.
So you've been incarcerated several times, because
Mm-hmm.
of your addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that gay men are twice more likely to be incarcerated when using crystal meth? You write
Mm-hmm.
about that a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's because of the amount they use and the length of time that they use it. It makes them more subjective to getting in trouble. And the fact that they do it in groups, you know. So the Red Roof Inn, there's when there's a party, there's people in, there's people out constantly all night. They get reported. And that's what happened to me. My neighbors were calling the police saying there is something happening over there
Hey,
because there are men in and out all
yeah,
night,
sure.
over and over. It's just it's very suspicious. Yeah, I used to use with a gentleman who was a millionaire, and he lived in this posh neighborhood. And at first, he was very careful, but then the more he started to use, the more he didn't care. And cars in and out, Ubers in and out, and it didn't last long till he's in prison for a very long time now. Um, but yeah, I think that's part of it for sure.
So,
But I just wasn't careful either.
well, right,
Um,
because you stop
yeah,
caring. I mean, you get to
right.
that point where, like,
Yeah,
what we were talking about earlier, you just got delusional about it, everything.
yeah.
And, it's a different story playing in your head than what's actually happening in reality and what everybody else
Yes.
is seeing.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
what are some of the long-term side effects from,
Hmm.
using it intravenously?
Hmm.
6 years later, you're talking about that you're going to sleep and you're still feeling all those
Yeah.
euphoric feelings again. Other than that, what are some of the long-term
Mm.
side effects where it could really be detrimental for your health?
Well, luckily for me, I didn't suffer from psychosis too much, but it's very common that gay men will go into psychosis. And that psychosis can affect you cognitively long term.
Mm.
And it can make you very suspicious, paranoid. It could make you constantly be in that flight or fright mode. So there is long-term effects of mood stabilizers, and even schizophrenia is more likely too. For me, a long-term effect is these using, I call them using dreams. I like, for instance, I could be at the gym and my veins are popping out, and there's a switch that flips and I see a needle going in, and our body just goes right into it, right into it. So I have to breathe. You talk about transmutation, breath work. It's going
Breath
back to
work.
that breath, telling your heart you're safe. The heart tells your brain you're safe, and the brain calms down the rest of the body. And that can happen in very quickly. Long-term effects, though, there could be some heart damage. That's one long-term effect, high blood pressure. The cognitive damage is repairable. And I was just reading a study on this actually, because I always thought the cognitive damage could be a long-term effect, but in terms of short-term memory, being able to reason, think, that is actually repairable. It takes the brain about 12 to 24 months to repair itself, but that's if you actually put effort into it. So I did a lot of brain games, memory games. I would read a lot, to try to get the brain to repair itself. Because in the first 6 months, it's hard to explain, but you see, like I would see a computer screen and totally forget how to work it, or the keyboard. I wouldn't, it just looks like a bunch of letters to me. I didn't know
Almost,
what to
almost like
do.
a form of Alzheimer's, right? Early
Yeah,
onset Alzheimer's.
yeah. And of course, short-term memory, and I was trying to wait tables. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, I couldn't remember anything, I literally could not remember.
Orders.
Yeah. Right. I would just come back and say, what did you say again?
Oh my
And
God.
it was a mess. But yeah, but there's some work to do, but studies show too, though, after some time, you can pretty much reverse, the body heals itself so well.
Mm-hmm.
You can pretty much reverse the effects unless there is some heart damage. So there's a new meth. It's called super meth that's out right now.
Super meth.
And super meth, yeah. And it is damaging people to a higher degree. It's causing seizures. It's causing some internal damage that is beyond the meth we had. So what happened was sometime after, I guess, I think it was after COVID, the U.S. cracked down on meth labs in all across the country, And so they did a good job of it to the point where we had to get meth from somewhere. So the Mexican cartel and the labs have chipped in. So now they're making they can make it so well, it's a super meth. And so it's coming in droves. But I don't know why they can't. There's some reason they're not being able to stop that. But this was a report released by the White House last month in June. But this new meth, it lasts longer, it's more addictive, and it's more sexual. So I think it's being targeted and marketed to the gay population. But it is actually, so there were 37,000 actual deaths last year to meth overdose compared to in 2015, there was like 6,000.
I read a lot
Yeah.
about all these drugs that are being imported now where they're laced with fentanyl. Is
Hmm.
crystal meth one of the ones that they're also
Yeah.
doing that with?
Yeah, and that is a lot that is a reason for some of the deaths, the fentanyl. Um, but this they've replaced so they used to use, Sudafed, whatever that drug
Yeah.
is, and use Sudafed. They've replaced that with something called P2P. And it's much cleaner, also much cheaper.
Mhm.
So the rate is of the meth the rate of meth is coming in, the deaths are going up, seizures are going up, damage is going up, and then the cost of meth is
Going
going way down.
right, right. More
Yeah,
accessible, easily
yeah,
accessible.
yeah.
So I read a lot about people that suffer from addiction, depression, PTSD, a lot of these veterans where they
Mm,
are going to treatment facilities, mainly out of the country,
mm,
trying psychedelics and like
mm,
psilocybin,
mhm,
mushrooms on a
mhm,
macro dose level. And it's
mm,
really helped them a lot with their cognitive connection and improve their brain activity and even help them, right? I mean, some of
mhm.
these guys have tried to commit suicide and weren't successful. Um, what has been your experience with that through your community, or have you personally ever tried that?
Yes. So early on in my sobriety, one thing that I did that really connected me to a spiritual side is I went to an ayahuasca retreat. And before that, I tried psilocybin. It was a macro dose. It was a hero's dose, a journey. Those two things kind of changed my perspective on the way that I viewed myself and the world. So I said, when I did meth, it was the first time I felt like I could be myself or felt like a window to who I really was.
Hmm.
Ayahuasca and psilocybin, that was when I truly felt an acceptance and a connection because I felt connected to the entire planet in a way that it was soft and loving, and empathy and just this euphoria that was, not. And some people will say this is, that using ayahuasca and psilocybin are also drugs. I don't believe that.
Hmm.
But however, it was a euphoria that would never be ever replicated. And once I did that, I felt the a connection to a source energy
Hmm.
that I hadn't before.
Right.
And I felt like I could see myself as my true soul self without addiction and without all the labels. And that's when I dropped out of 12 steps because I couldn't go back and say I'm an addict
Right.
anymore
That's not who
because
you
that's not
are.
who I am.
Right.
That's not who I am. I am is like the strongest, most powerful words you could say.
Correct.
So I'm not saying I'm an addict anymore. So I dropped out of 12 steps and I connected with this group that I did ayahuasca with. And they actually kind of became my support network, even though they weren't gay and they weren't addicts. But the thing is that we came together and we talked about growth, healing, self-actualization, meeting our full potential. It was edifying and uplifting conversations instead of I couldn't make it through the week this week. I had to call my sponsor, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, they
It
want it,
was,
they want to keep you. I get that also. Yeah, right. With
yeah,
the 12 steps program, it's they want to keep you in that loophole
mhm,
of,
yeah,
I'm an addict forever. That's not the
yeah,
case. That's not who you are.
yeah,
Absolutely
yeah,
not. It was an
yeah.
experience that you went through in your
That's
life.
right.
It was a stupid decision, whatever it is
Yeah.
you want to call it, but that's not who
Yeah.
you are. It was,
Yeah.
I'm sure that it makes you obviously view life a lot differently, and from a different perspective now, where you can help so many other people. And maybe that
Hmm.
was the journey, right? That you were
Yeah.
put on this planet for, to help
That's
other
right.
people suffering, and struggling with this addiction right now. Um, so in your spiritual awakening, you talk about the three phases from addiction to sobriety. Can you tell us what those three phases are that you've learned?
Did I say that?
You have that on your TikTok. Come on, I love it. I'm telling you, I'm just going through your TikTok, and I'm trying to get an idea. I'm trying to get a better feel for you so that we can have a nice, engaging
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
can't put it down. It really is very
Oh,
engaging
nice.
content. You're doing an amazing job.
Thank you.
And I'm sure you're helping so many people. I've heard your podcast.
Oh,
What is it called? It's
the aftermath.
the Aftermath podcast,
Yeah.
and you're on YouTube, and
Hmm.
you're interviewing so many men that are also dealing with this
Yeah.
horrible addiction and are sober
Hmm.
now. So
Hmm.
yeah, you talk about three phases from
Hmm.
addiction to sobriety, which
Yeah.
we pretty much gone through everything right now that you've experienced. When you did your ayahuasca root spiritual routine, did you do it here? Did you go out of
I
the
did it
country
in
to
the
do it?
US. I
Okay.
did it in the US. The organization that provided it is an actual church, so they can actually legally provide it in the US.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I did. I did it in the US, and I've done it a couple times more here in the US as well. Psilocybin, I do use on a regular basis too.
Mm-hmm.
I will microdose, and I take it to I do a macro dose too. When I go hiking, I meet the mushrooms and I go and we talk to the trees and
That sounds like
and
fun.
yeah, I just it's just it's so it's just such it's a state of being that I feel like we were meant to be in all the time.
Mm-hmm.
This eternal love and detachment
Right, that's key.
from it all, you
Right.
know.
And outcome,
Um,
and the outcome also, right? Just like being
yes,
present and in the moment. Um,
yes, yeah.
One of the things that you talk a lot about during your addiction is persona fatigue.
Oh yeah.
And I found that to be very fascinating because I think that applies to a lot of people, not
Yeah.
just people using crystal meth, right?
Hmm.
Like you can be on
Hmm.
you could be addicted to pretty much anything in the closet, and
Hmm.
you do have to play a role, right? For
Hmm.
every single person, for your children, for your
Yeah.
wife, for your, boss. How did that play out for you having to live? Like that's got to be
Yeah.
freaking exhausting.
Yeah. It was exhausting, but it also came natural because that's the way I lived my life
You're
for
right.
3 decades, almost 4 decades was, I had a persona at church. I had a persona with my dad's family. I had a persona to myself, my friends, and I was always, I was very hyper vigilant on who I needed to be to feel the most accepted wherever I was. Because that's my whole mission in this lifetime, I believe, in this incarnation, is to learn self-acceptance. And so I feel like that I was born into circumstances that made me feel the least accepted as possible so that I can learn self-acceptance. That's what I believe. And I believe addiction was part of that process. And so I got I did get very tired of it. I also was good at it. I was able to hide my addiction for a long time from my kids and from everybody. But soon it just become you implode. You just implode because you just can't do it anymore. And then they cross over, the personas cross over, and then you get so tired of it, you just say, I'm not doing this. And that you let your freak flag fly. And I did at work, which got me fired.
And that's
I
where,
would,
yeah, that's where everything
yeah.
comes crumbling down at that point.
Hmm. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
you just mentioned your children, which they're beautiful, by the way.
Thank you.
Um, how difficult was this on them?
Well, it was very difficult for my daughter, especially. She was older when we went through this, and in my times of getting addicted to shoplifting, I involved them both. I
Mm,
had them help me. I then would write. I wrote bad checks on my daughter's checking account. She was 16, and so ruined her, her status there with that. She was at the mall with friends and couldn't get what she needed, and called me hysterical. And so they always leaned on me. The thing is, when I was married, I received my acceptance and my place in life by becoming everything I could be for them and my wife. Like the three of them never had to do anything mentally, physically. I took care of it all.
you were a package
And
deal.
I was, and that's where I found my meaning. And I could just shove everything that I was going through to the back. And so when I started going through this, it was like sweeping the rug out from under them. Like, where's my support? Where's my stability? And it was hard for them, especially my son who was younger. It was difficult for him to process what
Hmm.
was happening. And so he diverted into a lot of OCD behaviors. He got obsessed with the Rubik's Cube, and like different things like that he had to distract himself with because he just didn't know how to process it or even what to say or
Right.
even what was going on.
Yeah.
And
He didn't
and then
understand it.
no, he
Mm,
didn't. Luckily, they never, they never saw anything, even though I used while they were in the house. I had the door locked. I mean, I didn't ever use IV while they were in the house.
mm-hmm.
I always smoked. Um, but they never saw drug use. But then once I went to jail the first time, what happened with that was the guy that I had taken in got mad at me and we ran out of drugs and he left and he told the police that I was date raping. Because when you're on crystal meth, it's very common to be on GHB, which is labeled as a date rape drug.
Okay.
And so
Like a
he told
roofie? Is that like a roofie?
it's kind of it's kind of like ecstasy times 30. It's
Okay.
a liquid. If you take just the right amount, then it's very sexy like Molly. But you take a
Got it.
little bit more and you're out. You're passed out. So people do use it for date rape. Um, but anyway, he had told the police that I was date raping.
Mm.
So when they arrested me, they found some meth in my car. So they arrested me for possession and date rape. And so before they could drop the charges, my mugshot was put on the news and underneath arrested for drug possession
Oh,
and date rape.
God.
So the kids got an onslaught of Snapchats from their friends who were Snapchatting my mugshot on the evening news.
Horrible.
Yeah,
Horrible.
yeah. So they went through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
They went through it and a lot of confusion, about what's happening here because again you are a rock. And so but I will say I think that I guess I invested enough time and we bonded enough early on that they stood by me through all of it. My daughter, the last time I was arrested, no one would answer my phone call because everybody was tired of me being arrested, except for my daughter.
Mm.
She always, no matter what, cared for my well-being. She wanted to know I was okay. She answered my call. She and my son came and got me and picked me up from jail that last time. And that was the point where I had nothing. I had the shirt and pants and nothing else. Um, and so, my daughter was said to me at 16, she was like, we have to have a parent and we want you to be our parent
Oh
again,
my God.
you know? And that's when I made the decision and the commitment to, okay, I don't know how I'm going to do it from where we are right now, but we're going to build things back. And so actually, I say I built my life back, but actually the three of us built our lives back together. I mean, we worked on it. At the time this is another long story, but their mother had kind of almost moved in with the man. So they were in this apartment by themselves. Well, they stuck me in a window so I'd have a place to sleep because my ex-wife didn't want me there.
So I
But
was going to ask you, so did you
yeah,
maintain a relationship or a cordial relationship with your ex-wife, or were you guys in a
at
fight all the time?
no, yeah, at that point, no. We were not in any kind of relationship, but the kids snuck me in so that I'd have a place to sleep for a while until I was waiting tables and getting enough money that I was getting hotel rooms.
I can't imagine how difficult that must be, right? To have to let your parent in through a window to help them
Yeah,
out, right? Like that had to
yeah,
be so difficult on them, putting yourself in their shoes, and it just goes to show the level
yeah,
of love that they have for you, right?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
a lot of kids would have
yeah.
been embarrassed, right?
I
Like I don't
know.
want any association with you, and so I think it's really beautiful.
Yes, I just was so fortunate that they didn't turn back their backs on me. And then we became over the last 6 years, we've become so close, like closer than any friends I have. The three of us, we FaceTime almost every night. We're just in each other's lives very closely. And I just think it's part of it was again was that act of rebuilding. And not only was I rebuilding my life, but we were rebuilding our relationship too. And being real. I mean, they were already kind of upset with me for being gay and not telling them.
Hmm.
So I had committed to being honest with them from
Moving
now on,
forward.
and then I wasn't because I had this drug problem. So there was a lot of repair that had to go on there too.
Did you guys end up going to therapy together as a team, as a group?
Mm.
Uh,
We went to some therapy, yeah, and then we went to some spiritual programs, some spiritual meetings. We had a community that we would go to, and then we each saw a therapist for a while too.
okay.
Mhm.
Um, why don't you tell us about the different, you're doing a lot, you're a big advocate for the community, you're helping so many people. Tell us about some of the services and the
Mhm.
courses that you're offering. From what I'm reading, a lot of it is free, right? Like
Yeah,
you
yeah,
really are,
yeah.
you really are here
Mhm.
to help. Like this is
Mhm.
your calling. You're doing it the right way, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
because a lot of these addicts don't have the money to
right,
should they be in that position, right?
right,
Where they're
right.
ready to kick the habit. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the courses that you have
Mhm.
available right now?
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So the clients that I do offer one-on-one coaching, it's an intensive program called Addiction Alchemy. And there are four phases to that. That might have been what I was talking about.
Ah,
Um, but they are men who are in the last phase. So they're relapsing maybe every 3 months, and they have a job, they're functioning, but they just can't get that last relapse out. And so those are the ones I can offer a one-on-one intensive coaching program. It's 6 months. However, for everyone else, like you said, I mean, there's if you're coming out of a meth addiction like I was, you don't have the money for that. But I put together a course called Reframing Relapse. And the reason I call it that is just like what's happened in the recovery community is that we have painted relapse as something shameful and something negative and something that we have to we have to do this walk of shame and get a new chip and start our days over and double down on all this guilt that we already feel. And I don't like that approach. What I'd like to do is, how was this relapse the best thing that's ever happened to my sobriety? And extract the benefit from it, extract the learning from it, uh, reframe how we see it, that it's not a stumbling block, it's a stepping stone. And so I put a course together and I put my heart into this. I put everything I have and that I even offer into this 4 week course, and it is free. There's guided meditations, there's breath work in there, there's a lot of perspective shift modules that will help you say, you don't have to start your days over. This is when you decided. Whenever you decided, I'm done with this drug, that's your date of sobriety. What happens in between is just part of the journey, you know. And so just drop all the attachment of it and move forward with your life because people, these guys, they relapse and they just lose it. They completely lose their cool and they hate themselves for a couple of months and they go right back to it. So anyway, the course is free. And there's journaling in there. There's just really every tool that I use. There's tools to identify your limiting beliefs and how to overwrite your limiting beliefs, supercharged affirmations. I mean, there's everything that I have, I've put I
Everything that
put
you've
in
worked
there.
with, everything that you've
Yeah.
worked with in
Yep.
your struggle on healing,
Hmm.
you've put it all in there for free to help everybody
Hmm.
else that's
Hmm.
struggling.
Yep.
Um, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna add all the links in the comment section when I upload
Okay.
this to YouTube so that everybody can go to all of your social medias. You're on TikTok, you're on Instagram, you're on Facebook. Um, and you can find him through there, Dr. Dallas Braggs. So let's close out the podcast, sir. Again, I
Okay.
love what you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
Give us one, give that one person that's listening, that one person that's at the end, that one person that
Mm,
feels like they just want to take their own life right now because
mm,
they don't see a way out. They don't see the light.
mm,
Give them some words of inspiration on how they can do it because you did it.
hmm. I would say to keep in mind that everything in life is temporary. So even this emotion you're feeling right now, this feeling of hopelessness is temporary. Let it ride out and do something, one thing different today that you've never done before, and make it very simple. Maybe it's I took a walk. Maybe it's turning your phone off for 5 minutes. Maybe it's praying. Something you've never done before. Do one thing, and the impact and the ripple effect of that one thing, I promise, begins the process and tells the universe, I'm ready to change. And just celebrate that you did it, get through today, and do something different the next day. And eventually it builds. And find someone to tell. Like tell the person that scares you the most to tell that you have this problem. Like if mom doesn't know, your partner doesn't know, somebody, tell a stranger on the street, but get it out of you. Because one of the most impactful things you're ever going to do is get out all of this that's stored inside you to purge it and cleanse it and have it come out. So tell somebody today as well.
Okay.
That's what I would say.
Awesome information. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me and all the listeners that are going to tune into this amazing podcast filled with really helpful information. But I wish you all the best. Um, I hope that we remain in contact, and I'll definitely tag you on all the posts that I'm going to do with the different clips, so
Yes.
that you can use them as well. And I, again, all the best of luck. I think you're doing an amazing thing. You're doing God's work. You really are. You're
Oh, thank you.
you're a beautiful person for what you're doing. I can sense that just from talking with you. You can get that from all of your social media posts.
Yeah, thank
Uh,
you.
so
Thank you.
keep doing what you're doing. You're helping a lot of people.
Thank you. And maybe I'll see you in South Carolina sometime.
You better believe it. Take care of yourself, okay?
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.